While it is common knowledge that William the Conqueror defeated Harold II of England at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, that wasn't really the end of the Norman Conquest. And although at Hastings a grave blow was dealt to the English aristocracy, there were still some survivors who continued the fight back. One such man was Hereward the Wake. Hereward was born around 1035 in Lindsey, now part of Lincolnshire. It was where the Lincolnshire Wolds is now, mostly surrounded by marshland. He was actually in exile during the Battle of Hastings, otherwise perhaps he would have fought in the battle. He was at that time in the service of the Count of Flanders in modern day Belgium. When he returned to England, he found that his brother had been killed by William the Conqueror for resisting the invasion, and that his country had basically been taken over. The reason he was in exile was because Edward the Confessor had decided to pretty much get rid of him because he was a troublemaker, and it proves that he was also a troublemaker for the new king, William I, as well. Upon returning to England, he got straight to work fighting against the Normans and used the Isle of Ely, where I am today, as his base. Ely, like Lindsey, although smaller, was an island mostly surrounded by marshland, known as the Fens. The Fens are now drained and used as farmland, but then they were pretty much entirely flooded and only really traversable to people with the right local knowledge. Hence, Ely was the perfect place to base his resistance because it was pretty much inaccessible to the Normans. Many other Anglo-Saxons flocked to the Isle of Ely in order to continue the fight against the Normans, all of this happening in the later years of the 1060s. One of the people who joined him on the Isle of Ely was Morcar, the Earl of Northumbria, who had already been fighting against William. Part of the reason there was such resistance to William's invasion wasn't just the fact he was a foreigner trying to impose his own rule on the country, but the fact he did so incredibly brutally. After winning Hastings, he didn't move straight to London to take the capital, but instead wove a zigzag path across southern England, killing and slaughtering and pillaging anyone and anything in his way, pretty much to let people know that he wasn't to be messed with. When he eventually arrived in London, he had himself coronated on Christmas Day in Westminster Abbey. One of the sort of interesting anecdotes from that day is that after or during the coronation, a crowd that had gathered outside the abbey cheered for the new king, perhaps out of fear, perhaps because they genuinely liked him. But either way, the Norman knights inside mistook the cheering for a riot, so they decided to react in the usual moderate and measured Norman manner by charging outside and slaughtering everyone they could. There were other rebellions against William's rule, but Hereward's is the most well known, perhaps due to the amount of mythology and legend that developed around it. He managed to hold out on Ely for a very long time due to its defensible position, and William was only really able to take control after forcing or bribing some local monks to show him the route across the Fens. The Normans were eventually able to attack the city. There's, of course, a sort of mythological story involving all sorts of heroic deeds by Hereward and witchcraft and such like on the part of William. But whatever actually happened, the Normans were eventually able to take the island, but they were not able to capture Hereward, who escaped. It's unknown where he went. He simply vanished. And there was, of course, the legend that he still roamed the countryside fighting the Normans for much longer afterwards. In order to ensure that their rule was not opposed again from Ely, the Normans decided to make a very substantial impression on the local populace, and they built Ely Cathedral, one of the country's grandest cathedrals and most imposing. The cathedral is known as the Ship of the Fens because it can be seen for dozens of miles across the flat fen land. So pretty much anyone in the Fens knew who was in charge because they could see who was in charge. The brutality and the imposition of rule by the Normans seemed to work, as there was no further resistance in Ely from this point, and the cathedral still stands as an incredible landmark over the surrounding countryside. As for the question of whether Hereward the Wake was the last Anglo-Saxon, I think that's in a way true, as he was one of the last people to put up a significant revolt, although there were some later ones, for example, a rebellion in the north of England, which led to the harrying of the north, when William salted the earth, brutally killed pretty much anyone who had opposed him, and indeed anyone who hadn't opposed him in the area, which dealt a blow to the north that it would take decades to recover from. After the Norman Conquest, many of the Anglo-Saxon warriors made their way east to join the ranks of the Varangian Guard. The Varangians were the personal bodyguard and elite warriors of the Eastern Roman Emperor. The Anglo-Saxon warriors in the Varangian Guard would once again meet the Normans in 1081 at the Battle of Dyrrhachium. They were, though, again, like at Hastings, defeated, and many of the Varangians were slaughtered by the Normans. Another notable Anglo-Saxon who survived the Norman Conquest was Edgar Atheling, who was actually pronounced as the heir to the throne after the death of Hereward II, although he was only a young boy at the time. This was made by the Witan, who were the ruling council of England, but after the Battle of Hastings they had really no power and held no sway of the country realistically. The Atheling was exiled and also travelled to the Eastern Roman Empire, and he actually supported the First Crusade by providing siege equipment. Hereward the Wake, after he disappeared, began to fade into legend, and in later chronicles, much of his story was, of course, greatly embellished. During the Victorian era, there was a great revival of interest in the Anglo-Saxons, and that helped him become the sort of English national hero and symbol of English resistance he is to this day. And his legacy can still be seen in Ely. Many buildings are named after him, and I'm currently walking along the Hereward Way, a footpath that travels from Rutland to Norfolk. Ultimately, despite Hereward's heroic resistance and the resistance of others like him, Norman rule was thoroughly imposed by the sword and by the feudal system, which replaced pretty much all of the Anglo-Saxon lords with Norman lords, and the English-speaking English people became ruled by Norman French-speaking aristocracy. And it wasn't until the reign of Henry IV, over 300 years later, that a king of England actually spoke English as his first language. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, please do consider subscribing. It would be very much appreciated. And if you'd like more videos on the English countryside, English country history, style, and mythology, I'll have more of those coming very soon. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.